Hey friends, tonight we're drifting back through time to the flickering shadows of forgotten festivals and the bizarre traditions that once anchored the human soul. To the changing seasons, it is a strange irony of history that the more civilized a society claimed to be, the more chaotic and primal its celebrations often became. We imagine the ancient world as a place of rigid marble and stoic philosophy, yet their most sacred moments frequently involved wearing the skins of beasts or shouting insults at the very gods they feared. There is a quiet contradiction in the fact that these rituals, which appear so alien and even frightening to us now, were actually the primary way people found a sense of order and belonging. They believed that by intentionally inviting a little bit of madness into their streets, they could keep the true darkness of the world at bay. Before we fully relax, gently tap that new YouTube hype button. If you feel like helping small storytellers like me, feel free to like and subscribe. If you enjoy this calm corner of historical tales, leave a comment with your city and local time. It's comforting to know who else is traveling back in time alongside us. Now, settle in. Let your thoughts soften, and together we'll wander into the quiet echoes of the past. The air in the narrow streets of Rome is thick with the scent of roasted grain and the sharp metallic tang of cold winter air. It is the middle of December, and the usual hierarchies that govern the empire have begun to dissolve like salt in water. This is the time of Saturnalia, a festival dedicated to the god of agriculture and time, a period where the world is turned entirely upside down. You can hear the distant sound of laughter echoing off the stone walls, but it is not the measured laughter of the elite. During these days, the master waits upon the servant, and the citizen dons the soft wool cap of the freed slave. The great forum, usually a place of stern law and political posturing, is now a sea of colourful tunics and gambling tables. There is no work being done in the courts or the shops. Instead, there is a pervasive sense of permission. People move through the torchlight with a strange, frantic energy, knowing that for a brief window, the social order that dictates every breath of their lives has been suspended. In the shadows of the temples, the small clay figures known as sigillaria are traded between friends, their painted eyes staring out into the dim light. These little dolls are the remnants of a much older, darker tradition, a silent nod to a time when the sacrifices were not made of clay. As you walk deeper into the heart of the city, the cold stone of the pavement feels solid beneath your feet, providing a grounded contrast to the ethereal quality of the celebration. The smell of spiced wine drifts from open doorways, mingling with the heavy incense burning on small street altars. There is a specific kind of silence that exists underneath the noise of a festival, a quiet realization that the sun is at its lowest point and the year is dying. The bizarre customs of Saturnalia are a desperate, beautiful attempt to coax the light back into the world, to remind the gods that humanity is still here, dancing in the cold. As the night deepens, a king of the Saturnalia is chosen, often a person of low status, who is given the power to issue absurd commands. One person might be told to jump into cold water, another to sing a song of mourning in the middle of a feast. It is a ritualized mockery of power, a way for the common person to touch the hem of authority without the danger of authority. Orange glow of the oil lamps casts long, distorted shadows against the fluted columns of the Temple of Saturn. These shadows seem to dance of their own accord, mimicking the movements of the revelers. There is a heavy, rhythmic thud of drums coming from a nearby square, a heartbeat for a city that has temporarily forgotten its own rules. The transition from the structured day to the lawless night is seamless, a slow slide into a collective dream, where the only thing that matters is the present moment and the warmth of the fire. The Roman night eventually yields to the grey chill of dawn, but the spirit of the strange does not vanish with the arrival of the sun. It merely migrates across the geography of time and belief. If we move forward deep into the heart of the European Middle Ages, the arrival of spring brings with it a ritual that is perhaps even more unsettling to the modern eye. In the rural villages of the Pyrenees, as the snow begins to melt from the jagged peaks, the festival of the bear begins. The air here is different than in Rome. It is crisp and smells of damp earth and pine resin. Men from the village disappear into the woods, only to emerge hours later, covered in thick sheepskins or soot, their faces blackened beyond recognition. They have become the bears, the wild things that have haunted the edges of human settlement since the beginning of memory. These bear men move through the village with a heavy, lumbering gait, their movements a deliberate imitation of the predator. They carry long sticks and hunt the young women of the town, marking their faces with soot in a ritualized display of fertility, and wildness. There is no malice in the act, but there is a profound sense of the uncanny. The villagers watch from their doorsteps, their breath blooming in the cold air, like small ghosts. This is the boundary between the wild and the domestic, a physical manifestation of the fear that the forest might one day reclaim the fields. The texture of the sheepskins is coarse and matted, catching the light of the pale spring sun. The sound of heavy boots on the thawing mud creates a dull, rhythmic squelch that underscores the chanting of the crowd as the bearmen are eventually caught and symbolically shaved by the village barbers. The tension of the winter begins to break. The shaving represents the taming of the wild, the victory of the community over the chaos of nature. It is a slow, methodical process. The barbers use large wooden razors, moving with a practiced grace that belies the strangeness of the scene. The soot is washed away, and the men return to being neighbours, fathers and sons. Yet the memory of the bear lingers in their eyes. This festival is a bridge, a way for the people to acknowledge the beast within themselves before tucking it away for another year of labour and prayer. The sensory details of the village, the smoke from the chimneys, the barking of dogs, the cold touch of the mountain wind, all feel heightened in the aftermath of the ritual. Further north, in the misty lowlands, another tradition takes root during the lean months of late winter. The straw bear of Whittlesea is a creature of golden stalks and rustling movements. A man is encased entirely in a suit of tightly braided straw, weighing nearly 70 pounds. He cannot see, moving only by the guidance of a leader who pulls him along a rope. The sound of the straw bear is a constant, dry whisper, the friction of thousands of stems rubbing together as he dances for his supper. He moves from house to house, the golden spectre against the damp brown landscape of the fens. The tradition is a plea for a good harvest, a physical offering of the very material the people hope to see in abundance come autumn. The bear is both a gift and a beggar, a strange faceless entity that demands attention and rewards it with a clumsy, heavy dance. The weight of the straw is immense, pressing down on the wearer's shoulders, a physical burden that mirrors the weight of survival in a pre-industrial world. As the bear dances, small bits of straw break loose and scatter on the ground, tiny golden markers of his passage. The people who watch him feel a mixture of amusement and reverence. They understand that this is not just a man in a costume, it is the spirit of the grain itself brought to life through labour and tradition. The festival ends with the burning of the straw suit, the flames licking at the dry stalks until they vanish into a column of white smoke and orange sparks. The heat from the fire is a sudden, intense contrast to the damp cold of the afternoon, a brief preview of the summer to come. The ashes are scattered, returning the essence of the bear to the soil, completing a cycle that is as old as the first ploughed furrow. While the fields of the north burn their straw, the high plateaus of the Andes hold rituals that look toward the stars and the deep veins of the earth. In the shadow of the great peaks where the air is thin and taste of salt and stone, the festival of Koyoriti draws thousands of pilgrims toward the glaciers. They carry heavy crosses up the steep slopes, their movements slow and deliberate in the oxygen-starved air. This is the Star Snow Festival, a bizarre and beautiful convergence of ancient mountain worship and later religious influences. The pilgrims believe that the ice sea of the glacier is sacred, a physical manifestation of the divine that can heal the sick and bless the crops. They carve large blocks of ice from the blue-white heart of the mountain, carrying them down on their backs. The sensory experience of the glacier is overwhelming. The light is blindingly bright, reflecting off the pristine snow with an intensity that makes the eyes ache. The wind howls through the crags, a high-pitched whistle that sounds like 1,000 flutes playing at once. The ice itself is freezing against the skin, a biting, numbing cold that demands a specific kind of endurance. As the pilgrims descend, the ice begins to melt, the cold water soaking into their clothes and running down their spines. They do not complain. The melting is the point. The water is a blessing, a liquid prayer that connects the heavens to the parched earth below. The ritual is a reminder of the fragility of life. In such an extreme environment, a way to negotiate with the massive, indifferent powers of the landscape. In the valleys below, the dancers of the festival wear masks made of fine wire mesh, painted with frozen expressions of surprise or joy. Their costumes are heavy with embroidery and small mirrors that catch the sun, sending shards of light dancing across the rock walls. The music is a constant driving force, a mix of drums and brass that echoes through the canyons. There is a quiet irony in the fact that these elaborate, colourful celebrations take place in one of the most desolate landscapes on Earth. The people create their own vibrancy where nature has provided only grey and white. The bizarre tradition of carrying the mountain's heart down into the valley is a way of shrinking the vastness of the world, of making the terrifying power of the Andes something that can be held, however briefly, on a human shoulder across the ocean in the sun-drenched coastal villages of Japan. A very different kind of ritual takes place in the heat of the summer. The Namahage festival involves men dressing as mountain demons, wearing hideous masks with tusks and wild hair made of hemp. They carry large wooden knives and buckets, roaming from house to house with a terrifying roar. They are looking for children who have been lazy or disobedient, shouting questions that challenge the moral fabric of the household. It is a bizarre form of social policing wrapped in the guise of a nightmare. The smell of the straw capes the demons wear is dry and earthy, a sharp contrast to the humid, salty air of the coast. The floorboards of the traditional houses creak under the heavy footsteps of the Namahage, a sound that signals the arrival of the divine and the dangerous. The interaction between the demons and the families is a carefully choreographed dance of fear and hospitality. The head of the household offers the demons sake and rice cakes, treating the monsters as honoured guests. This is the heart of the tradition, the recognition that the things we fear must be invited in and fed if we are to live in peace with them. The demons, softened by the offerings, provide blessings for the coming year before disappearing back into the darkness of the mountains. The masks they leave behind are objects of intense craft, their painted surfaces gleaming in the low light of the hearth. There is a profound silence that follows their departure, a collective sigh of relief that is shared by the entire village. The bizarre tradition reinforces the bonds of the family and the community, using the theatre of the grotesque to anchor the values of the everyday. The journey of forgotten festivals leads us next to the stone-paved streets of medieval England. during the Feast of Fools, usually held around the time of the New Year. This was a celebration where the lower clergy would take over the cathedrals, electing a mock pope or bishop. It was a bizarre inversion of the most sacred space in the world. The cold, vaulted ceilings of the great churches, designed to draw the soul toward heaven, instead echoed with bawdy songs and the clatter of dice. The smell of incense was replaced by the heavy scent of frying sausages, cooked on the very altars where the Eucharist was normally celebrated. This was not an act of atheism, but a necessary release valve for a society lived under the absolute weight of religious and social hierarchy. The participants wore their vestments inside out or donned masks made of animal skins. They rode through the naves on donkeys, braying like beasts, in place of the Gregorian chants. The sensory dissonance was profound. The visual majesty of the stained glass and the gold-leafed icons stood in stark contrast to the mud-stained boots and the drunken swaying of the celebrants. There is a quiet mystery in how the church hierarchy allowed this to persist for centuries. They understood, perhaps better than we do, that if you do not allow people to mock the things they fear, the fear eventually becomes unbearable. The Feast of Fools was a controlled explosion, a way to burn off the resentment of the underclass, in a way that ultimately reinforced the power of the church once the festival ended and the Pope of Fools was stripped of his paper crown. As the sun set, behind the gargoyles, the cathedrals would glow with the light of thousands of cheap tallow candles, the smoky, acrid smell filling the air. The shadows cast by the revelers moved across the stone saints and martyrs, making it seem as though the statues themselves were flinching from the noise. The ground, usually swept clean from the feet of the pious, was littered with scraps of food and spilled ale. This temporary desecration served a vital purpose. It reminded everyone that the world of men is messy and flawed, and that the perfection of the divine is something entirely separate. When the bells finally rang for the morning mass, the day after the feast, the transition back to sobriety was sudden and absolute. The priests returned to their duties, the servants to their labour, and the cathedral was scrubbed clean, leaving only the faint scent of grease and the memory of laughter in the rafters, in the mountains of Switzerland. A similarly strange tradition takes place in the village of Howwell. The Barzeli involves characters dressed in elaborate costumes made of natural materials, holly, pine needles, straw, and even snail shells. These figures represent the spirits of the woods and the winter, and they roam the streets to drive away the darkness of the ending year. The costume, made of holly, is particularly striking. Thousands of sharp green leaves are sewn together to create a suit that is both beautiful and painful to touch. As the wearer moves, the leaves rustle with a dry, metallic sound, and the bright red berries provide a stark contrast to the grey winter sky. The snail shell figure is a marvel of patience, thousands of tiny spirals, clicking against each other, with every step a sound like 100 tiny clocks ticking at once. The Barzeli do not speak, they move in a rhythmic, swaying motion, their presence announced by the clanging of heavy cowbells tied to their waists. The weight of these bells is significant, pulling at their frames and creating a deep, resonant vibration that can be felt in the chests of the onlookers. The smell of the pine and holly is fresh and sharp, a reminder of the life that persists, even when the ground is frozen solid. The villagers stand in the cold, their coats buttoned tight, watching as these embodiments of the forest claim the streets. There is a sense of ancient continuity here, a feeling that these figures have been walking these same paths since long before the village had a name. The bizarre nature of the costumes is a tribute to the complexity of the natural world, a way of acknowledging that nature is not just a resource but a collection of strange and powerful spirits. The theme of the bizarre and the forgotten continues in the humid, shadow-drenched temples of ancient Egypt during the Festival of Drunkenness. Dedicated to the goddess Hathor, specifically in her terrifying aspect as Sekhmet the lioness, the festival was a ritualized reenactment of a near apocalypse. According to myth, Sekhmet had once begun to slaughter all of humanity, and was only stopped when the gods dyed vast quantities of beer red to look like blood. The goddess drank the brew, became intoxicated, and fell asleep, sparing the world. To honor this, thousands of worshippers would gather at her temples to consume massive amounts of pomegranate-dyed beer, seeking a state of divine intoxication that would allow them to commune with the goddess. The atmosphere in the temple courtyards was one of heavy, rhythmic drumming and the clinking of ceramic jars. The heat of the Egyptian sun was relentless, making the air shimmer and the smell of the fermented beer even more pungent. Worshippers lay on the cool stone floors, in the shaded porticos, drifting in and out of a drunken haze. There is a quiet irony in the fact that this mass intoxication was considered a deeply pious act. The goal was to lose the self, to move beyond the boundaries of the ego and touch the primal energy of the divine. The red-dyed beer stained the lips and hands of the participants, a visual reminder of the blood that was not spilled. The flickering light of the braziers in the inner sanctuaries cast long feline shadows against the hieroglyph-covered walls, making it seem as though the lion-headed goddess herself was pacing through the crowds. As the festival reached its peak, the music would become faster, a swirling cacophony of harps, flutes, and sistrums. The sensory overload was intentional, a way to shatter the mundane reality of the everyday. For the ancient Egyptians, life was a delicate balance between order and chaos, and the Festival of Drunkenness was a way to pay tribute to the chaos so that order might be preserved for another year. When the worshippers eventually woke the following morning, the temple was quiet. The only sound, the rustling of palm leaves in the breeze. The feeling of exhaustion was accompanied by a sense of spiritual cleansing. They had faced the wrath of the lioness and survived, anchored once more to the cycles of the Nile and the steady movements of the stars. Moving across the Mediterranean to the rugged landscapes of ancient Arcadia, we find the festival of the Lataia, a ritual dedicated to Zeus Lycaeus on the slopes of Mount Lycaon. This was a dark and mysterious tradition, whispered about by other Greeks, with a mixture of fear and fascination. It was said that during the sacrifice, a single morsel of human flesh was mixed with the entrails of an animal. Whoever ate the piece of human flesh would be transformed into a wolf for 9 years. The ritual took place in the dead of night, far from the civilized eyes of the city-states. The air on the mountain was thin and cold, the only light coming from the embers of the sacrificial altar. The smell of charred meat and wood smoke hung heavy in the darkness, a primal scent that signaled a regression to something ancient and predatory. The transformation was not just physical, but a social death. A person who became the wolf had to leave human society, living in the wilderness and avoiding the company of men. If they refrained from eating human flesh for the duration of the 9 years, they could return to their human form. The bizarre tradition was a test of restraint, a way to explore the thin line between the human and the beast. The silence of the Arcadian wilderness was the backdrop for this internal struggle. The feel of the rough bark of the trees, the cold dampness of the earth, and the distant howling of actual wolves were the only companions for the initiate. It is a haunting reflection on the nature of civilization, that to truly understand what it means to be human, one must first understand what it means to be a wolf. The rituals of transformation and the bizarre find a different expression in the medieval tradition of the boy bishop, a practice common across Europe, but particularly celebrated in the great cathedrals of England and France. On St. Nicholas' Day, a young choir boy was elected by his peers to hold the office of bishop until Holy Innocents' Day. This was more than just a game of dress-up. For those 3 weeks, the boy possessed the actual authority of a prelate. He led the services, gave sermons, and even collected the rents and taxes owed to the church. The sight of a small child draped in heavy, gold-embroidered silk vestments, carrying a crozier twice his height, was a powerful visual contradiction. The heavy weight of the mitre often slipped over the boy's eyes, a reminder of the immense burden of power placed on such small shoulders. The sensory details of these ceremonies were a strange mix of the sacred and the playful. The incense-filled air of the cathedral would be punctuated by the high, clear voice of a child, pronouncing blessings over grey-bearded canons and stoic knights. The boy's small hands, usually stained with ink or rough from chores, would be covered in rings of office. There is a profound irony in watching the most powerful men in the region kneel before a child, a literal interpretation of the biblical promise that a little child shall lead them. This bizarre tradition served as a reminder of the humility required of the powerful and the inherent dignity of the powerless. It was a period of lightness within the long, dark winter, a time when the gravity of the church was tempered by the innocence of youth. As the boy bishop moved through the streets in procession, the people would throw small coins and sweets, the sound of the metal clinking against the cobblestones, creating a festive rhythm. The smell of roasting chestnuts and wood smoke from the nearby houses mingled with the cold, damp air of the church. The child bishop's reign would end as suddenly as it began, with a final service where he would be stripped of his finery and return to the ranks of the choir. The transition back to being a student, a servant, and a child was a lesson in the transience of worldly status. The memories of those weeks, however, stayed with the community, a small flame of hope and subversion that burned through the coldest months of the year. In the remote villages of the Italian Alps, the festival of the Krampus provided a much darker counterpart to the benevolence of the child bishop. On the eve of St. Nicholas, men would dress as the horned goat-like demon, wearing heavy fur suits and masks carved from wood with long red tongues. They carried bundles of birch sticks and wore heavy cowbells that created a terrifying, discordant din as they ran through the dark alleys. The air was thick with the smell of wet fur and the metallic scent of the bells. The Krampus did not come to bless, he came to punish the wicked, a physical manifestation of the consequences of one's actions. The contrast between the golden, saintly figure of Nicholas and the dark, hairy Krampus was a stark representation of the duality of the human soul. The experience of being chased by a Krampus was one of genuine visceral fear. The sound of the bells getting closer, the sight of the glowing eyes behind the wooden masks, and the sting of the birch switches on the legs created a sensory memory that lasted a lifetime. The bizarre tradition served as a way to externalize the darker aspects of the winter, the cold, the hunger, and the isolation, and give them a face that could be understood and navigated. After the demons had passed, the village would gather for a feast, the warmth of the fire and the richness of the food serving as a sanctuary against the terrors of the night. The Krampus was a necessary shadow, a reminder that the light of the season is only meaningful because of the darkness it displaces. The final chapter of our journey into the forgotten and the bizarre takes us to the ancient city of Athens during the festival of the Smaphorия. This was a secret, women-only ritual dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, focusing on the mysteries of life, death, and the fertility of the earth. For 3 days, the women of the city would leave their homes and camp together on the Pynx Hill, excluding all men from their presence. This was a bizarre departure from the usual male-dominated life of Athens, a temporary autonomy that was both sacred and politically significant. The air on the hill was filled with the smell of rotting vegetation and the sharp scent of pennyroyal, a herb used for purification. One of the most unusual aspects of the festival involved the remains of pigs that had been sacrificed and thrown into deep pits months earlier. During the Thanphoria, specialized fetchers would descend into the pits to retrieve the decayed flesh, which was then mixed with seeds and placed on altars. The texture of the damp, dark earth and the smell of decomposition were integral to the ritual. This was a direct engagement with the process of decay as a precursor to growth. There is a quiet, heavy irony in the fact that the most civilized city in the world relied on such a primal, visceral ceremony to ensure its survival. The women worked in silence, their movements a coordinated dance of retrieval and offering, a secret language shared between the earth and those who tended it. The final day of the festival, known as the Kaliginea, or the birth of the beautiful, was a celebration of the success of the ritual. The atmosphere shifted from one of somber duty to one of quiet joy. The sensory details were lighter, the taste of honey cakes, the sound of soft laughter, and the warmth of the autumn sun on the white marble of the city below. The bizarre traditions of the suffocating layers provided a space for the women of Athens to assert their own power and connection to the divine, away from the gaze of the state. When they finally returned to their homes, they carried with them a sense of renewed purpose, having successfully negotiated the transition from death back into life. As we look back through the layers of time, these bizarre traditions and forgotten festivals reveal a fundamental truth about our ancestors. They lived in a world that was often unpredictable and frightening, and they used these rituals to create meaning, where there was none. Whether it was the chaos of Saturnalia, the transformation of the Lycaea, or the inversion of the boy bishop, these acts were a way of talking back to the universe. They were sensory, physical, and deeply human attempts to find a place within the vast, silent machinery of history. The smell of the smoke, the weight of the masks, and the sound of the bells have faded into the echoes of the past, but the impulse that created them remains. Now, as the stories of these ancient nights begin to blur into the quiet of your own room, the shadows of the past soften, the distant drum beats and the rustle of straw bears become nothing more than a gentle rhythm, a lullaby for the modern soul. The world outside is still, and the weight of the day has been lifted, replaced by the heavy, comforting blanket of sleep. The history we have travelled through is no longer a series of dates or names, but a collection of moments, the warmth of a fire, the cold of a mountain wind, the taste of a festive meal. These are the threads that connect us to those who came before, a long, continuous line stretching back into the dark. Rest now, let the echoes fade entirely and drift into the deep, quiet peace that waits at the end of all stories.